when I originally came up with the concept, I had never made a side-scrolling platformer, and with each new game, I kind of tried to think of something I haven't done before. And I had never done a side-scrolling platformer, but I wanted it to be very in your face. Like I said, I wanted it to be an homage to my childhood. So at first I was thinking I was going to do like NES style graphics, but I kept on boiling it down to simplest terms, and I came up with the concept of doing like a Game Boy style game. So the graphics are the color palette and resolution of the original Game Boy, like the clunky Game Boy with 4 colors, blown up, for HD. So it's, very in-your-face retro, and that was kind of the look we were going for. But first, let me give you a little background on me. I'm Chris Bryant. I'm the co-founder and chief technology officer for TruFun Entertainment. That's just my obnoxious way of saying that I'm a programmer. So, radraygun.com, TruFun101@hotmail.com, @TruFun202, and Facebook.com/RadRaygun. This is a company my friend and I just started, actually, officially like 6 months ago, but we've been working together for the last few years. And TruFun Entertainment was a company name I came up with about 10 or so years ago. Little background on me. This is, like I said, kind of my hobby and my side company. I'm a solutions architect at a marketing agency here in Dallas, and I have a bachelor's degree in computer science from UCD. So, but the whole reason I got into programming as a kid was because I wanted to make my own video games. So finally, after learning to program as a kid, going through college, and working for the last 10 years in the real estate and marketing industry, I finally found my way to video games. So I'm living the dream these days. So, like I said, we built Rad Raygun for Xbox Live Indie Games. And I'm going to talk about 5 things that went right and 5 things that went wrong during the development process. So, real quick, let me show off the trailer to the game so you can kind of get a feel for what we're talking about. And I don't have, I'll crank my volume up, I don't really have sound. So yeah, as Rad Raygun, the story goes that you were a lab experiment gone wrong. It's by Dr. Yokoi, and Yokoi Gunpei is the original inventor of the Game Boy. So as it goes, you're like a lab tech that gets fused with a robot that Dr. Yokoi is building. And it's then your job to go save the 80s from these communist robots. So it gives us a platform to have all kinds of silly, stupid 80s jokes throughout the game. So you do things like, the first boss you see was Mad Donna, so it's a play on Madonna. And then you break down the Berlin Wall, but we do it like Contra style. So like if you guys have played the first level of Contra, it's kind of like that. And just kind of it gives us a cool theme for the game. Here's a look at the stats. We were in development for 130 days. That was 2.5 years. 85,000 lines of code, 6,000 art assets, and 9 original songs. So it took us a long time to build this game. It was very much a nights and weekends kind of thing. So I have both Chris Hernandez and I. He's the artist, and he did the level design and the overall theme of the game. He has a full-time job, I have a full-time job, and a wife, and 2 kids now. So this was a labor of love. So let's talk about what went right. First thing was the team. Like I said, I've been developing games for years, but this was the first time where I actually went out and decided to get a team up front. You know, I can do a little bit of artwork, but I'm definitely stronger in programming, and I have 0 sound experience. And I've made plenty of you know, one-man show games that end up, you know, looking kind of clunky because I did the artwork and I have 0 sound. So it would either end up looking clunky or abandonware. It'd sound great for a week or 2, and then I'd kind of fall off. But by forming a team up front, it kind of put me on the hook to finish the game. So I knew when I was going to go recruit that I was like, okay, this is for real. Like I'm really going to have to commit to this and finish the job. So that's Chris Hernandez on the right. He did the storyline. When I came to him with the concept of I want to make a Game Boy style platformer, I was like, I wanted to be like Mega Man, but I don't have any theme for the game or whatever. So I was like, that's all up to you, buddy. So he came up with Rad Raygun, the character, the setting, and everything, as well as developing and designing the levels. And then we reached out to Phantom and K to do all the sound and soundtrack. And what we did for that was we reached out to, well, we went to a website called 8-Bit Collective. And it's basically a repository for chiptune artists. And for those of you who don't know, chiptunes are, it's like a techno style. The music you heard during the intro is chiptunes, where they actually use old devices like the Game Boy and the NES to produce sound, and they actually make like techno music with it. And I had just found out about chiptunes when we first started the project, and I was all about it. So I was like, we have to have a cool, you know, in-your-face chiptune soundtrack. So anyways, we went to 8-Bit Collective, and Phantom and K was actually our #1 pick. We listened to several artists, and he was the first guy we went to thinking there's no way in hell that he's actually going to say yes to do this, because he had name recognition. So we figured we'd start at the top and see where we can go, and he actually agreed. So that was really cool. And in fact, like I said, this is a 2.5-year project, and within like 2 months we already had all the soundtrack done. So we were able to develop while listening to the soundtrack, and it kind of guided us, and it was a good inspiration. So definitely what went right was forming a team up front and committing to that team that we're in this together, and we're all gonna have some work to show, or have something to show for all our work. The next thing that went right was building an editor. So with every game I had built before, like I said, I was pretty much a one-man show, so I could hard code in the levels. So essentially, if you think of a level as like a 2D array of integers or whatever, I could just literally sit there and code in what the map looked like, which was a programming nightmare and a maintenance nightmare. So I had struggled through that enough, knowing that I had to build a tool to help me and our team build the game. So before even trying to code the engine or getting anything up and running that was playable, I focused on the editor so that I could hand this off to Chris Hernandez, and he could begin to design the levels and you know, the layouts and stuff like that. So this is a look at the editor itself. You can select from your tiles below. These are the different folders of the tiles, like there's ladders and decor and collisions. So you select your tile and you drag and drop it and build the levels. Then there's multiple layers that you're seeing in the one screen. We have the parallax layer, then backgrounds, background 2, collision, entities, which are like enemies and ladders and stuff. And then the front layer and the foreground layer. And then also these can move at different speeds, and that kind of gives you a cool 3D look. And then from the editor, you can also set up zones, which is kind of like if you guys remember playing Mega Man, when you hit the wall and it does the full screen transition, we consider that a zone. It kind of tells the camera how to move and things like that. You can also do player tiles, such as where are we going to start in the game, and then setting up a checkpoint. So as well as enemies, you can drag and drop enemies in there. Power-ups, health upgrades, 1-ups, things like that. And then preview, you can actually play the level from within the editor as well. So it allowed him to set the layout, but also test jumps and things like that without having to. This is all independent. This was all in his end. I was able to develop the tool and deliver it to him, and he could design all the levels without me having to change the code at all. So this was huge in letting us do parallel development. He could do his side of it. I didn't have to worry about the art assets or any of the kind of level design. He could just come to me and say, hey, can we tweak this mechanic, or this enemy isn't behaving correctly, or can we make shooting do more damage, things like that. I can make those tweaks in parallel to him designing the actual levels.
Who did you code that editor in? What language?
This is all in C# with XNA. What also went right was we went with component-based enemy behaviors, and the concept is for every enemy we could say this guy's going to walk on the platform and shoot, or this guy's going to climb up a wall and jump off at you, or this guy's going to just spin in circles, and if you hit him, you take damage. What we did was we boiled everything down into a behavior. So we had movement behaviors and attack behaviors. So a movement behavior might be, like I said, like a platform walker. Maybe he's heat-seeking or going after Rad. Maybe he just jumps on an interval. He could follow a sine wave, or maybe he doesn't even move at all. And then attacking, maybe he just attacks by colliding with Rad. Or maybe he shoots a projectile. Or maybe he spawns other enemies. If you think of Mega Man, again, like there'd be little tubes that spawn little tellies that spin around. And that enemy is actually, his whole job is to spawn other enemies. So what this allowed us to do was then mix and match for each enemy. We could say, okay, this little guy, well, he's going to be a platform walker, and he's going to have collision damage, and then he's also going to have projectile attacks. So each enemy got one movement behavior and then n number of attack behaviors. So this was huge. Once we had the attack and movement behaviors laid out, I could build a new enemy in about 10 minutes. He would send me the art assets, and I could just kind of tack on the behaviors in the code, and he was up and running. One other thing I don't have on the presentation, but was a huge help, was we used a tool called SpriteBuddy, and essentially it allowed him to lay out the frames of animation on the sprite sheet, and he could say what frames went with what animations. And then I had hooks in the engine to say, I know what idle is, or I know what run is, or I know what damage is. And he could then say, for damage, play this animation, which is these frames at this speed. And that, again, allowed us to do parallel development, because he could design and animate all the enemies without me having to hard code all of those behaviors. And SpriteBuddy is out there. It's a free tool. It's I don't know that it's still supported, but what's out there works, and we still use it to this day, in fact. So the next thing that went right was using Bitbucket.org. In case you don't know, this is a free online repository. You get up to 5 users, so it's great for small teams and small projects. You get free Git or Mercurial for your source control. You get a free wiki, and you can also have your own download section. and it's all secure, so only your team can get in there, and it's great for, you know, collaborating and working together. And this was huge for us because we had one place for all of our downloads. I'd be getting files from Chris and then Fan and Kay, and then I would be producing files and map files and stuff like that, and I could just add them to the downloads section, and then it was one place for everything. This also has a built-in issue tracker, so as we were developing the game, we could report bugs, and I didn't have to keep a clump of emails together. That was the way we were going at first, but once I could actually get everything inside of Bitbucket, I didn't have to worry about it, and I didn't have to keep it all in my memory. So that was a huge help to have this as a tool for us. And the next thing that went right was creating a standout game. So, and believe me, this wasn't the plan to begin with. I just happened to have a crazy concept to build a game that looked like a Game Boy game. But it ended up really making us stand out. So we launched the game on February 19th of last year. And ScrewAttack, who is I don't know if you guys are familiar with ScrewAttack, but ScrewAttack.com is a local games review site. They publish top 10s and they have a podcast and things like that. And they do an annual gaming convention called SGC. And at SGC this past year, they had a section of the convention off for indie developers. They call it Indie Heaven. And I had kind of, you know, talked with them on Twitter and stuff and told them I was local, and literally they're in Louisville. There was like 10 minutes down the road. So they had me come in and do a Out of the Box, which is their weekly show where they do, they showcase a new game that's come out and things like that. So we did Out of the Box, and then they invited us to go to SGC, where they had, like I said, Indie Heaven, and there was probably 20 developers out there with their own booths and their games displayed. While this is going on, Destin McGarry, who now works at IGN, he used to work at ScrewAttack. He's walking the floor and looking at all the games. And thankfully, because of, first of all, the soundtrack that we had from Fan and Kay, we were able to pump the music and have it, you know, kind of driving people in. But also having a unique look and feel drove traffic as well. So it definitely proved to be a benefit to have something that kind of stood out from the crowd. And while we didn't see it as being a risky endeavor, you definitely don't see, you know, AAA titles coming out looking like Game Boy games. But it worked for us, and it paid off to be an attention getter. So, and you can see the nice thing about it was Destin did 5 games we loved at SGC, and we were picked as #1 for Rad Raygun. So that was awesome. That was a good day. Doing a live interview with IGN, I was on cloud 9. So that was awesome. And also, what went right was actually finishing the game. The day we could finally go onto the Xbox Live marketplace and see our game, like, holy crap, that's dream come true stuff. Like, you know, it's one thing to develop a PC game like I had done for years, and it's in such a, you know, a niche thing, and maybe you have a download on the website, but to see something on a console and to play it was dream come true. Like, this was huge, and the 2.5 years that we spent developing the game, like, it was all, you know, worth it to actually finish the game. So, I'm not sure if you've heard this story or not, but this was a story that kept me motivated. So, like I said, I work for a marketing agency, and we were going through a tough time, and the owner of the company shared a story with me that really stuck with me, and it helped me plow through the long 2.5-year development process. So the story goes with Steve Jobs. This is back in the early 80s. They were doing the first run of the Macintosh computers. And they kept pushing the date and pushing the date and pushing the date because the software developers were saying, we're not ready yet. We've got to make just, you know, one more change. We're like 90% there. We just we're not there yet, but almost. And they kept pushing the date. So finally, Steve Jobs walks into a room full of software engineers and writes 3 words on the board: real artist ship. And what he meant by that was, you can be the greatest artist in the world. You can paint the most beautiful painting, but if you don't ship, if you don't deliver, it can't be consumed. And nobody is going to appreciate what you've spent your heart and soul on. So these 3 words kept echoing through my mind. At 4 a.m. when I'm trying to finish this game, you know, when I've only got like 2 or 3 hours a week to work on the game, real artist ship just kept echoing through my mind. I knew, like, I can't waste my time, I can't waste my team's time. We've already done this for 2 years. I have to finish this game. And just knowing that when I first started the project, I felt like I had something inside that I had to deliver, and I had to do my homage, and I had to present my work. So shipping was a huge thing to actually deliver the product, and this quote was very powerful for me. And by finishing the game, we've had a lot of exposure and a lot of things come our way. So like I said, SGC was kind of where it all, that was our first time to actually be in front of the public to show off our product. And then that caught the attention of Midnight City. They are a spinoff of Majesco Entertainment, and they're starting their own indie label. So they reached out to us to do some work, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And that led us to an invite to PAX, where we actually got to show off our game at PAX as well, which is, you know, the Penny Arcade Expo, the annual video game expo. So that was pretty cool to actually, you know, go from something, you know, from nobodies to a local convention to going to PAX. That was crazy. And the moral of the story is, for 2.5 years, aside from Twitter and YouTube, nobody knew about us, nobody cared. But once we had a product and showed that we went from, you know, from conception to actually delivering a product, once you've shown that you can do that, that's when we got contacted. That's when we got the IGN coverage. That's when we started doing podcast interviews. That's when Midnight City reached out to us and said, hey, let's do business. So, you know, you could be developing the greatest, coolest, you know, concepts right now, but just know that when you deliver that, it's going to be night and day. It certainly was for us. So, that was what went right. That's all the positive stuff. There's plenty of negatives, so let's talk about what went wrong. We did not use Bitbucket to its full potential. So, we were using it for source control, but we weren't both using it and pulling it from source control. Basically, I used it just to check in my code, but I would still deliver the editor to Chris Hernandez like once a month. Like, I would do a handful of fixes and be working on it, and then when I felt like I had something to deliver, I'd package it up, zip it, and send it to him, and then he could then work on the levels and use the bug fixes and things like that. Not using the source control the way it should be, where I check it in and he gets the immediate updates. Now the project we're on, we're in real time, we're developing and making changes every day, and I can see when he does commits, I can see when I do commits, and we can each log in and we're doing updates in real time, and we're developing way faster. So we've been on this new game for about 6 months, and the level of progress we've made and the speed at which we're able to get work done is way faster than what we did before. We're also using the issue tracker a lot more diligently to, instead of logging real bugs, it's also to-dos. So instead of trying to keep everything in my head, I can just log a quick issue and then forget about it. And then if I feel that I have downtime or that I've just knocked out a lot, I can go to the issue tracker and you know, knock out a handful of bugs. And that was definitely not leveraged to its full potential the first time around. Major editor changes. So Chris saw this error way too much. One of the problems when I was first developing the game is with XNA, you can develop the game for both PC and Xbox 360. And I was doing the majority of my development on the PC because it's easy. Hit F5, run it, you can play it, everything's good. Knowing that I could then port it to the 360 using the same code base, so I didn't really worry about it that much. That was a big mistake because while the 360 seems very powerful, and looking at games, like Grand Theft Auto and all those kind of games, like it seems like a very powerful system. It's not that powerful. Like those people have mastered what they do, and they know how to squeeze every drop out of that console. Because we're building a 2D platform with 4 colors, and to go from a PC version that was running great, then we go onto the Xbox version and it runs like crap. So anyways, the first time I ran the game on the 360, it took 5 minutes to load, and I was getting about 5 frames a second. So I had major issues, and I had just developed, the game seemingly, pretty well on the PC. So what ended up happening was I had to go back and rebuild the way we were doing the tile sets in the engine. And all of those levels that he had been developing in parallel with my development were then wasted. Like he spent hours and days, weeks and months developing these levels. And I pretty much had to tell him, all that work you did, we're going to throw out the window because I messed up and this is, not going to work the way we built it. So I had to come up with tools to convert his files to the new file format, and it wasn't 100%. So it's still, he had to still painstakingly go through every tile in the game and make sure it was all formatted correctly. And he was not a very, he wasn't happy with me when that happened. So that was a big, punch in the gut when I finally was excited to play the game on the 360, and it's 5 minutes to load, and it's choppy, and it's sluggish, and it was a horrible experience. So definitely the lesson is test on the console as soon as you can. In fact, just this weekend, I'll get to what we're currently working on, but I just this weekend got it running on the 360, and we have a similar issue where it runs great, even on this little laptop, which is not that powerful, but on 360 it's chugging. So, but at least I know what we're in for, and we're not, a week before the deadline. So we're in a similar situation, but I'm more prepared for it this time. The last part of this is a week and a half before we were going to launch the game, we had finished the game on PC, played through it, tested it, everything was good, and I was like, great, we built the game, let's port it over to 360 and run it. And this was after we ran into the 5 minutes of loading, so I had improved upon it a pound since then. And I ran the game, and it loaded up in like 30 seconds instead of 5 minutes, which is, you can pass with that. You can get a loading screen, and that's doable. But I hadn't done testing since we finished the game. So that was at about the halfway point when I did that test on the 360, and I resolved those issues. But I built the rest of the game not testing it again on the 360 until we were ready to launch. And we had major issues all over again. The 360 garbage collection is not very elegant. And basically you have about a gig of memory available at one time. And if you exceed that, the 360 tries to be smart and it will do garbage collection for you. But that's very expensive the way they do it. So basically the game would run great for about 5 seconds and then chug, 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 chug. Play for again for 5 seconds, chug, 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 chug. So that was a nightmare. I was like, this isn't even playable. I've spent now 2.5 years developing this game for this console, and you can't play it on this console. So again, I was reflecting back going, have I just wasted 2.5 years of my time and my team's time, and will we ever actually launch this product? So after staring at the memory management tool for like the 1,000th time, I finally found where we had a memory leak, and I was able to fix that, and the game was running well after that. So, lesson learned on that is definitely test on the platform that you plan to deliver on. And just because they say it's cross-platform doesn't mean it's going to perform as well. The other thing that wasn't going well during this project was lulls in communication. So literally weeks and sometimes a month or two would go by without us actually talking about the game and what we're currently working on. So I was busy building the engine and things like that in the toolkit, and Chris was busy designing the levels and the enemies and things like that. But we were both kind of going down our separate paths, and we'd kind of check in every few weeks. But what that led to was us focusing on things that we felt were important, but weren't necessarily benefiting the other. So I would be building new features for the editor, but he's stuck on something that I could be fixing in a day that would get him up and running and really make his life way easier and things like that. So we've definitely improved our communication with our current project, and now we email probably at least 2 or 3 times a week, where before, like I said, weeks or months would go by between communication. And what happened was towards the end, we're like, okay, wow, we have to finish this game. And then there's this huge list of things that I feel are important versus what he feels are important, and we had to, finally prioritize everything and just kind of work through it. Where if we would have had ongoing communication, we would have done things differently and much smoother. We would have been able to really come together with our ideas instead of he having his vision for the game and me having my vision. We really weren't collaborating very well. So. And the last thing was not enough testing. Like I said, with the 360, we did not do enough testing, and we ran into some major issues with performance. But not only that, me personally, I don't feel that programmers make very good testers because we know how to break it. So we kind of tiptoe around stuff and say, no, why would you put Fred in a money field? Nobody's going to do that. Don't do that. You'll break it if you do. And it's the same thing with gaming. I play through the levels a million times, and it played great for me because I know what to do. But as soon as you put that controller in somebody else's hand and they're jumping the wrong way, or they keep hitting the wall, why are you doing that? You're going to break the game. Don't do that. It's fragile. So we didn't make very good testers on our own, and I'll put that onus on me. I didn't make a very good tester of my stuff because I keep playing. I would test what I was building, but I wasn't testing it. I wasn't regression testing it and testing it as a whole. I would build one piece and test that one piece and then move on. And when you strung the whole game together, yeah, it's playable and yeah, you can get through it. But like I said, there were little things like if you jumped in the corner, sometimes you'd get stuck in the ceiling. So at the last minute, what we had to go do was actually remove a collision tile in every corner so that it wouldn't cause that bug. So there were so many little workarounds that we had to kind of fudge to get through testing and QA and get approved to get on Xbox Live Indies. But once we finally got launched, suddenly the amount of people that are playing your game goes from a handful to hundreds, if not thousands, and all of the bugs that we had kind of shoot under the rug to say, it's not that big, we'll get back to it. All of that came back. In fact, Ben discovered a bug that we never found until a lot longer. So, anyways, I was once told something, the concept of tech debt, and that is every time you cut a corner or you go the easy route from a technology perspective, it goes into your tech debt. And by the end of your project, you're going to pay that debt, whether it's users getting your bugs and claiming you have a crappy product, or you delay your release that much longer because of all that debt that you're having to pay off. Because you took the easy route or instead of doing things the right way, you kind of just made it work and used duct tape or whatever you want to call it, you're going to pay for that. And that was definitely a learning in this, from this project. And with the new project, we're definitely going back and solidifying each concept as we go. And we're not moving on until we've proven that out. And then we regression test and we make sure that each feature we add is building upon the original concept. So, not enough testing was very bad. And this was, I was proud of this picture because he's working with garbage, and it's so depressing because garbage collection, like I said, on the 360 was atrocious. And a week before launch, the game is running like crap on the 360, and I hit like total depression. Like I was going into a spiral of defeat. Like I have wasted my time, my team's time, and we're never going to launch this game unless I get it actually running and performing well on 360. And it's a big hit to your ego when, you know, the engineer in me wanted to build everything from the ground up, and I was paying for that by not leveraging other people's tools and using what's proven and what works instead of using what's out there. I wanted to build everything on my own, and it was rough, and it definitely caught up to me at the end. And that was a rough couple of weeks to actually get through all the garbage collection issues and the memory management and things like that. And to this day, it's still a hit to, you know, you kind of have to develop a thick skin. Like we've had the game out for a little over a year now, and there's very positive feedback, but you know, there's also negative feedback. Nick asked me before we did this of like, what's the most memorable negative comment that you've ever gotten? And one of our speedrunners who plays the game a lot, and he's on Twitch TV, and he plays the game, he's a big fan of it, but he also had one of the most memorable negative comments. And with Xbox Live indie games, when the game crashes, it's called a code 4, and that's basically a generic error of like an exception, unhandled exception has happened, and the game crashed, so it pops up a code 4. And his comment on Twitter was, the most difficult boss in Rad Raygun is the code 4. And I was like, damn. I had to retweet it. I was like, that's pretty brilliant. So the lesson is I've had to kind of roll with it and learn to develop a little bit of a thick skin. So what's next? Like I said, we were approached by Midnight City. Midnight City is a spinoff of Majesco. And Casey Lynch, who was a editor-in-chief at IGN, left IGN to go start up a little side project and just something he's always wanted to do, and that is Midnight City. So what they are doing is they're wanting to run an indie label for video games, and he's running it like a record label where he's letting, instead of the bands, these are the developers, he's letting them do their own thing, but he's supplying them with the tools they need to be successful. So they reached out to us and they said, you know, we love what you did with Rad Raygun. We love the essence of it and the flavor of it, but we want more. And we want to do Super Rad Raygun. So they said, imagine Rad Raygun on steroids. So you guys did Rad Raygun with 5 levels and a few power-ups. He's like, we want like 5 times the amount of levels, more power-ups, more enemies, more modes of play. We'll do integration with Xbox Live Arcade so you can have achievements, you can have leaderboards, and all of that. And honestly, when they first approached us, I was a little taken aback. I was like, we just, you know, went through 2.5 years of this. I'm ready to hang my head up and go home. Like, I felt like I had accomplished what I wanted to, and I wanted to move on and be done with it. But I spoke with my wife, and she said, you know what, this is your dream. You have to go for it. And we signed up for it and signed the contract, and we're now doing Super Rad Raygun: The Lost Levels. So, which is, you know, a play on Mario 2: The Lost Levels. And we're also doing the super part. So it's kind of a play on the Super Game Boy. So with the Super Game Boy, you could play your Game Boy games, but you could also switch up the color palette and play it on your Super Nintendo. We're going to do it. We're building upon the game. Like I said, the first game had 5 levels, where this one's going to have close to 30. We're having a whole new set of power-ups, new enemies, new bosses. We plan on doing things like a boss rush. Since the game kind of took off with a niche audience of speedrunners, we're going to have a time attack mode where you can post your high scores on the Xbox Live leaderboard list. And it's great. Working with Midnight City, they've supplied us with our dev kits. They've also broken down some walls for us as far as getting into the Microsoft Developer Network and things like that. So it's been pretty cool with these guys. And here's kind of a preview of some of the things we're working on for Super Rad Raygun. Like I said, with the first Rad Raygun, we did this concept of components for the enemies, where they could have attack behaviors and movement behaviors. Well, Chris Hernandez did a comp of like his dream enemy editor, and he had a version of this where he's like, I want to be able to do anything and create any kind of enemy I want, and it's completely abstract. And which is cool for me because I don't have to hard code all the enemies. He gets to do everything himself, and I'm just building this tool. So what you're seeing are the different tabs are the different modes. So like right now we're in the shooting mode. So you could set the movement. He's not going to have any movement, whether or not he has gravity, whether he's vulnerable, invulnerable, or ricochets like projectiles. Does he spawn anything? If so, at what interval, and play this sound. And then there's other triggers like when you hit rad, go to this mode, or when you're damaged, go to this mode. And then you could do like counters, like if you spawn, more than 10 enemies, then you go to this this phase. Like for instance, spawning could be a projectile. So like if you shoot, you're actually spawning an enemy of a bullet, and that bullet itself is an enemy. So then you could say, if you've spawned more than 8 bullets, then go to the reload mode. And so this has proven to be so useful because already we've developed over 100 enemies for the game. The first game we had about 20 enemies, and they were all hard-coded by me. Where with this, I've built one tool, and like I said, we have over 100 enemies going in the game. And to my surprise, it's all working out well. So I was like, this is going to be a nightmare. I've spent all this time, and I just don't see this working out. And it's proven to be pretty cool so far. The other thing we're adding is a particle system. So Midnight City said they wanted Rad Raygun on steroids. So with the first game, we were pretty rigid with trying to keep with the Game Boy look and feel. But since they've asked for Super Rad Raygun and really going on steroids, so we're like, we kind of break that rule a little bit. So, like I mentioned, we're going to change the palette up. So what you're seeing is an explosion going off. And we're changing the 4-color palette. We pulse it real quick, and we do like a smooth transition where it's all green, but then we go to this red and orange like an explosion's going off, and then we fade back into the green. So it's kind of a special effect. And then the particle system is going off as well. And then I developed this particle tool to where you can select which particles you want, whether it's bullets or blades of grass or whatever, and then the speed and the lifespan and the rotation of the particles themselves. So it's pretty cool to see it in the tool, and then on the next screen, see it actually working in game. And then finally, like I mentioned, since it's a much bigger game and we're wanting to have a much bigger feel, kind of like when you went from Super Mario Brothers to Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo, you had the overworld map where you can kind of see where Mario's going. It's not just a number level progression. We're going to have the same thing with Super Rad Raygun, where you can kind of decide and choose your path, but also it adds kind of an adventure element to the game. Like there'll be certain areas that you won't be able to access until you have certain power-ups or you've completed certain sections of levels. So it adds kind of a you know, a Metroidvania element to the game as well.